your socioeconomic status, and what you look like can factor into whether or not you have access to health care.
Black physicians and nurses were needed to be central in the struggle for equality.
We need more black doctors, especially black primary care physicians.
We can try to help our first responders when they are contending with the cynic behavior associated with PTSD.
Advancing diversity and equity are both imperatives, but they are not the same thing.
Blacks were among the very first Americans to use a form of vaccination to protect themselves from disease.
In a civilized society, healthcare disparities should not exist. If you think that's an extreme statement, you're wrong. But I get it. We live in a society that accepts a certain amount of unfairness and treatment towards other people, so I understand where you're coming from. But disparity is not normal or acceptable. My opening statement raises really two questions. First, are we a civilized society? Because let's face it, if we're not, and we agree that we're not, that kind of lets us off the hook, doesn't it? Letting go of that title drastically lowers the expectations that we have towards how people treat us and how we treat others. But then it raises even more questions around, if we're not a civilized society, then what are we? And what can any of us expect if we don't have civility in our society? Second question's a lot easier. Do healthcare disparities exist? Yes, they do. Not worthy of a lot of discussion. Now, as a lawyer, I always like to define my terms before going into a discussion to make sure we're all on the same page and we're all talking about the same thing. So let's look at the word civilized. I struggled with which definition to use, but I chose this one. Civilized is defined as showing moral and intellectual advancement, being humane, ethical, and reasonable. Well, given the last 4 years of our society, I think we'd be hard-pressed to identify any of those terms to the society that we live in and the way our society has behaved. Next, society is defined as a large group of individuals who live together in an organized way and who make decisions regarding how they want to live and then share the work that goes into living together. Society can also be defined as an organization of individuals who come together for a specific purpose or to participate in specific activities. That second definition is important because it opens up the idea of societies existing within other societies. And I think that more closely represents what the United States looks like. In our society, there's so much hate, division, and aggression from so many different angles. Worst of all, there is so much indifference to the sufferings of other human beings. Instead of one big society, it appears that we are living and being multiple societies within societies, all expressing great care and concern for our personal causes, but not enough effort or care regarding uniting and working together. It becomes a common technique to temporarily turn off our civility, to express ourselves and our anger and our frustration without the limitations that civility would put on us. But when we take those breaks from civility, we start to break down the very foundations of civilization, and that cannot be a good thing. Now, back to healthcare. First, a few disclosures. Number one, I'm a healthcare lawyer. I defend and represent healthcare professionals, healthcare companies, in matters of regulatory compliance, litigation, and enforcement. So I live and breathe healthcare every day. Number two, I come from a healthcare family. I was born in Washington, D.C. and raised there, and my father was a doctor who had a private practice and who was also on the faculty of Howard University Hospital. Basically, my family was one of those where we talked about healthcare at the dinner table. And through those discussions, I got a very unique view of healthcare from the black perspective. When my brothers and I got old enough, we spent a lot of time working in my father's medical practice. You know, free labor, basically. Looking back, those were some of the greatest experiences that I had growing up. And they taught me a lot of life lessons about running a small business and about what healthcare really looked like.